That was quite a little drama we had with the state budget there for a month. One of the lead players is here to talk about it tonight.
The Dan York State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
Greetings to all of you. Pleasant to have you aboard on this kind of humid, overcast Monday. But by the time you're watching this at 7:30, that's probably all done. At midnight, certainly is supposed to be a beautiful day tomorrow. How are you? Good to have you. Hope you had a good weekend. Summer is waning. I saw a school bus today. It's obviously a camp bus, but I'm thinking, wow, only a couple more weeks and back to school. But it's the greatest time of the year, isn't it? It's football and it's baseball season. And then again, we ought to talk about whether we'll have those kind of falls here in the future in Pawtucket with our guest, Senator Bill Conley, who's, to his credit, leading the charge, I guess, on keeping the PawSox around. But first, we got to talk about that little drama that we had here for the last 30 days on getting a budget passed. Here's a headline that reflects on it. And here's a pretty good package and summary offered by Eyewitness News late last week.
It's over. A month without a new state budget. Old funding levels, the Senate voting 30-5 to pass the budget. Republicans were the no's. Mayors had told lawmakers people stood to get hurt with slimmer checks to cities and towns. How long would you have been prepared to let this go on for?
I really can't answer that question because I knew we had to do something relatively soon. I didn't want to put the cities and towns in the situation that they were talking about, but I don't think it would have gone on much longer.
Had this been a budget power struggle between the Senate president and the speaker, or was it all about the affordability of the car tax break?
No, this was purely policy.
So, Mr. President, this was not about the status of the House, the status of the Senate, their roles in the process. That was not the core of this dispute. It was about policy?
Absolutely. We're policy people here for the most part.
I'd probably vary a little in my interpretation. If you notice, the budget passed as originally agreed to.
And two Rhode Islanders who believe the showdown should not have lasted this long.
I would tend to agree with that.
Before voting, some senators saying they are worried about the loss of revenue over several years of the car tax phase-out.
I'm still not sure as to how we get to the $220 million, Mr. President. The Department of Health's entire budget, $25 million. DHS, $91 million.
I believe the Senate did the right thing, and I'll swear by that till the day I die.
Well, that's pretty profound. That only adds to the drama, don't you think, Senator? Now we're laying our lives down for these for these votes. Welcome. Good to have you again.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
Good to be here.
You're in the middle of this situation. You had Senate Finance, and you guys passed you passed the budget in Senate Finance.
We did.
And then all this. What happened?
Well, we passed the Senate. We passed the budget through the Finance Committee, really in order to get it to the floor. There were things in that budget that were important to us, and during the committee hearings, we emphasized those things in the budget which we thought were important to the state. But the discussion on the sustainability of the car tax relief really began at the Senate Finance Committee hearing we had specific to the car tax relief proposal. And those concerns extended from that hearing right until June 30th, when ultimately the decision was made to address sustainability of the car tax relief program through the budget.
Okay, well listen, here's a situation. I'm not gonna, you're an established, credible, trustworthy guy, so the language that I would use to contest this would offend, and I don't want to offend. I just don't believe it. I believe elements of it. Believe me, Nick Mattiello pulled one out of his hat during the campaign for the car tax situation. We all know that. We all know that that was more politics than policy. But he's convinced himself now that the policy is appropriate and that we will find $40 million a year every year for the next 5 to 6 years. And constructive questions about that, I think, are responsible. I don't know where that money's coming from either, and quite frankly, even in this budget, we got some $20, $30 million of unknown things that the governor has to do.
Right.
So let's not kid ourselves about that. But at the same time, the Senate President made a deal with the Speaker to get this thing done. And it seemed to me that there were some dangling things that did bother some senior senators. The payday lending didn't go the way exactly language-wise they wanted. The domestic violence bill seemed to be caught in the throes. And it seemed to me very apparent that the Senate president made a play on that last scheduled day of the session, and decided to tag the budget with this amendment. And he got snagged at midday rather than at nighttime. I mean, if he had thrown that in at 7 o'clock at night, Mattiello would have been flat-footed. But he got intel, and Mattiello called it a day, shut down the committee, and left. Thus the drama. I mean, the truth of the matter is, it seems to me that it was a play that the Senate president made that he had to unwind.
Well, I can assure you that from...
And you were instrumental in helping him unwinding it. It looked very formal and official doing it, by the way. Very impressive.
Well, the history, though, I think it is important to be completely accurate. And I can tell you that the concerns about the sustainability of the car tax relief program in the budget was there from the beginning of the Senate hearing on that bill, and those discussions continued right through the very end. Even after the Senate Finance Committee passed the budget for purposes of getting it to the floor, a number of Senate Finance Committee members, as well as other colleagues of mine in the Senate, continued to talk to me and talk to the Senate President about their concerns with the car tax relief proposal.
So, Bill, tell me, was he over his skis in making a deal with Mattiello that it would be, it'd be passed?
Not at all. If you look at what the House did, the House amended the budget 12 times on the floor. In other words, what came out of the House Finance Committee and ultimately was passed was amended 12 times on the House floor. We amended it once.
Not the car tax.
No, all different aspects of the budget.
No one was screwing around with the car tax on the House side.
No, that's pretty accurate.
Yeah,
that's pretty accurate. Yes.
So you're suggesting that the Senate has a right to amend. And so this does become, I'm not talking about power politics in terms of personalities, but it does become kind of a chamber-to-chamber type of thing then. There's something that happened there which was not unprecedented. It happened one time, I think 10, 12 years ago. But this one was a play. I think we ought to be honest about that.
Well, I think it did expose some flaws in the process. I don't disagree.
Which that the House shouldn't. What the flaw being when the House sends it over to you guys, they shouldn't be counting on it never being touched.
Well, I think that what it shows is that there should be a better process for reconciling differences between the two chambers. If you look at the past few years, what's happened? What's happened is that the end of the session has really been fairly chaotic and unpredictable.
True.
We were there until, I got home last year, about 7:30 in the morning, and essentially sat down on my porch and fell asleep till about 9 o'clock that evening. So,
well, both leaders have committed to making it more responsible and knocking things off at 9 o'clock at night and all that kind of thing, right?
Yeah, but is one person by fiat saying, I'm leaving at 10 o'clock process? I think not. I think there needs to be a more predictable process, more transparent process, one that members of the legislature as well as the public can rely on. So I think that those flaws have been exposed, and I think it's time to have a conversation about how we address those flaws.
In translation, the Speaker of the House shouldn't call all the shots, is what you're saying.
Well, I don't think the Speaker or the Senate President ought to call all the shots. And
yeah, but historically, the House Speakers call the shots, on how the whole thing runs. You know that.
I'm not sure that that's been the case. I'm not sure that even the Speaker would say that the Speaker should always call all the shots. But I do think we need a more predictable, transparent process for the chambers, for both chambers, and for the public as well.
To be fair to your point, I'm not suggesting the Speaker calls all the shots when it comes to the budget process itself, but when everyone gets together and they get their deal done, and the House sends their stuff off, when the House sends their stuff out to the Senate, they feel like that ought to, have your little go through the motions debate if you'd like, but that thing is rock solid done. That's how they feel about it. And you're suggesting, perhaps responsibly, that format doesn't necessarily fit, correct?
Yes, I do. I do think that.
I have to tell you though, the song and dance that you guys went through when you took the amendment away.
Yes.
and you took and you passed this new piece of legislation, which would require by 2021. I have to laugh. 2021? Come on, man. The Department of Revenue take a look. The truth is, responsible legislatures will take a look at this hard tax situation, and if the money's not there, we hit a recession, whatever, you just don't pass it. It's an annual approval of the money anyway. That looked to me as if it was just that was the wrapping around, you know, a box that had nothing in it. And frankly, I laughed like hell when De Palma started talking about North Korea. I wish we had the audio. You know, oh, we could have a recession and Kim Jong-un. I said, okay. I was running that on the radio, laughing my fanny off. I just thought it's just you guys are trying too hard.
Well, let's look at the history of the last car tax relief and use that as.
It got stopped.
It got stopped. And what happened when it got stopped? It got stopped during the 2011 legislative session. It impacted the 2010 supplemental budget to the tune of $18.1 million and impacted the 2011 to the tune of about $67 million. So what happened is the cities and towns, essentially, as well as the taxpayers who expected that tax relief, lost all of that. The taxpayers lost all of that tax relief. The cities and towns were left with the circumstances where they had to figure out what they were going to do.
What about this mechanism you put in would change that from repeating itself, real quick?
Well, a couple of things. It keeps the conversation focused on the sustainability. We don't want the cities and towns to get ambushed again, and taxpayers get ambushed again like they did last time. So it's a mechanism at least that says, look, in the outward years, in the future years of the tax relief, what can we expect? What can we predict? And it takes a collaborative approach. It requires the executive branch to do an analysis.
2021, because Nick wouldn't have dealt with it, because maybe he'll be gone by that time. Truth of the matter is, we could hit the skids in 18, 19, 20, and the legislature's going to have to look at it and say, hey, but guess what? We just hit the skids. We got to put a stop on this.
You're right, and I think it's going to be important that we continue to do our diligence so that if those circumstances arise, you know, if there's a shortfall in the budget, that we need to assess and determine whether the degree of car tax relief that year is sustainable for that particular year.
What we really need is car tax restructure. I can't believe we were in this situation. All we had, can't we just, you live in East Providence, could you just go over to Seacon? In Massachusetts, they do it really easy, you know. $25 per thousand, off the sticker, year to 10%, done, bang, boom. That, along with Proposition 2.5, saved that state. Why can't we just restructure the entire property tax system in this state?
Well, the entire property tax system?
Well, that's because you can't do the car tax in a vacuum. And that's a problem, even with this proposal that you guys passed. And it was shoved on you. I know you're trying to make, you know, something out of nothing because Nick Mattiello won the day on this particular case. But the whole thing is, not congruent. You know it and I know it. But last word on this, because I want to talk about the PawSox when we come back.
Sure. No, I think that the car tax relief that's a package that's in front of us now, you know, has a program of phase out and a schedule with it that right now is what we have to work with.
You want to bet $10 it never finishes?
And
you want to put $10 on the table?
I share your concern and the concern of the Senate President about its sustainability.
All right, we come back. PawSox. Stay with us.
State is not on the hook for any obligation of the city. At the end of the day, I don't think this is going to cost the taxpayers of Rhode Island anything.
This is Gina Raimondo talking about the PawSox. Look, you've been maybe one of the game-saving voices here, but I think even your rhetoric has been a little bit too, how do we say this the right way, almost cocky. When you said the other day, they'd be crazy to leave, being the PawSox. That's not the right tact, because you know what? They'd be crazy to stay right now with this crazy legislature and with the malaise and with Worcester breathing down our necks. To your credit, you're looking for some hearings in the fall and to keep the PawSox conversation alive. Give me the summary, the Cliff's Notes on what you're trying to accomplish.
Well, we finally have a piece of legislation before us to take a look at, and we've introduced it in the Senate. We're going to set up a schedule hearings this fall, beginning in September. We're going to essentially create as much public accessibility to those hearings as we can to take testimony. We're going to invite written comments from the public on the legislation. We're going to go on the road. We're going to have hearings in all four corners of the state of Rhode Island to make sure we guarantee that public accessibility, that it's just, you know, not a hollow phrase. and we intend our review to be comprehensive. At the end of those hearings, we want the conversation to be about the merits of the bill, not whether or not it was properly vetted, not whether or not the public had an opportunity to participate, not whether about it was totally transparent. We want the debate to be about the merits of the bills and not any of those other collateral issues.
Okay, I mean, it's interesting. I think it would be a more effective approach if you didn't have some competitors breathing down our necks at this point. And the House doesn't seem to be motivated to play ball. Nick Matteo doesn't seem to have an axe to grind, but it'll be interesting to see if he takes this stuff up. Are you going to try to time this so that you get some kind of a vote that actually puts the House on some kind of a timetable in the fall? Because they are going to get together to pass a couple of bills that were part of the dangling participle of the negotiations to put the budget thing back together.
Well, we're going back on the 19th to essentially finish up this past session, the bills that you said, as you said, that need to be transmitted between the two chambers.
PawSox stuff, pre or post that?
But I don't see that we're going to complete our hearings by September 19.
You seem very calm. You've always been a calm guy. Ethics Commission, I watched you for a long time. Was impressed by your work, clear thinker, all that kind of stuff. So I'm a fan. But you seem like you get no pulse on this, even though you're the guy driving it. I'm worried that you're going to lose this deal. You're going to lose this deal. Worcester is going to make a move on this thing, and those guys are going to go and say, you know what? Had it.
I agree that there's a sense of urgency, which is why I really wanted to get the legislation introduced this session. You're right that there was a fair amount of discussion between the governor, the speaker, and the Senate president about the legislation when it was initially completed, and who supported it, who didn't support it. We had to get by that conversation and get a piece of legislation to prove to the PawSox and the city of Pawtucket as well that we're serious about it, and we are serious about it.
Do you like it? Do you like the numbers?
I do.
Okay.
I think it's a really good deal.
All right, so when we come back, we'll talk about why you have to be spoon-fed this situation. Why is this unique? Stay with us.
Really work to try to, push the city, create pad-ready development sites. So a lot of that work we're doing every day and trying to pitch Worcester and Central Massachusetts to developers, to investors, to businesses. So this is really kind of a continuation of that, this conversation that with the PawSox. We think there's certainly the ability and spaces where it would make sense to explore, but they're going to do their due diligence and kick the tires, and we're just happy to be a part of the conversation.
Now, don't be confused. That is the CEO of the Worcester Chamber of Commerce, even though we were showing a bunch of Pawtucket stuff there. Tim Murray, president of the Worcester Chamber of Commerce, and former lieutenant governor. I had a lengthy conversation with him on the radio last week about this whole thing, and they're getting more and more aggressive. The mayor and the council are now passing resolutions. The heat is on with the city up to 146, and I'm just wondering about this really interesting political dynamic. Again, I think you've been a lead guy, so it's not like I got to say, wake up. If not for what you've done in the last 30, 60 days, I think this whole thing was dead. But it's strange. If I say Worcester's coming, at least the phone lines on my radio show are like, oh, well. Well, I don't know that the general public feels that malaise, but they're not aggressively speaking to save the PawSox based on that Providence debacle and the ill will and the post-38 studios, blah, 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 blah. No one trusts anybody for public-private partnerships anymore. But my prediction is, if they leave 2 years from now, you and everybody else will be the biggest, what's in state government history, because then all of a sudden they're going to take it out on you. So that's my speech. What do you think?
Well, that's why we got the legislation introduced. As I said, I think that the framework for the legislation is a good one. The participation by the PawSox essentially amounts to a contribution, the most of any International League team towards a publicly financed ballpark. Yep. The investment by the state is secured. The investment by the city by the city of Pawtucket is going to be on them, so the state is not as initially discussed backstopping it or guaranteeing it. So I think the structure is a good one.
Now so you're interesting. Like a month ago when you put this in, you're like, listen, we're not going to advocate. We're just going to present. Sounds like you're advocating, which I don't criticize you for. I mean, you got a lead follower, get out of the way.
Right.
So tell me about why this kind of, quasi-referendum-y process, because we don't have referendum in the state, is necessary in this particular deal. You can't do the deal the right way and say, by the way, it's more or less the same formula that we have right now, boom, get it done. You're just going to open a bunch of hearings where a bunch of crybabies are going to show up and go, ah! And then you're going to have a problem.
Well, no, I think
you know that's what's going to happen. What do you think? The people who want it are going to show up in droves? No, they're going to hope you do it. Everyone else is going to scream bloody murder at every library you show up and saying, this, 38, 38. You know what it's going to be like.
Just because I think it's a good deal doesn't necessarily mean the public has to think it's a good deal. We have to assess the state's risk.
I don't know, Bill. You do a lot of things every day that the public doesn't think it's a good deal, and you think it's a good deal.
It has to be done objectively. We have to assess the city's risk. That has to be done objectively. We have to dig down.
Isn't that the city's responsibility? Isn't the city government responsible to assess their own risk?
I think a part of the overall process, though, is that we need to ensure that every part of the package is looked at carefully, and every part of the package is sustainable.
It's almost as if, it's so funny, because it's almost as if there's some mystery that surrounds it that I haven't seen. It's pretty straightforward. The proposal's a mezzanine proposal, boom, boom, boom. If you wanted to save a building downtown, you wouldn't have you might have a hearing or two. I mean, you have hearings, but you wouldn't have a rolling parade out there.
Well,
what am I missing?
Well, when you call it a rolling parade, a couple of things that I think you yourself commented about just a moment ago. Whether we like it or not, this proposal is in the context of, the last proposal, which was so poorly received,
terrible.
and so
terrible
so
politics, terrible business. Everybody was
whether we like it or not, and I particularly don't. I think we're beyond the shadow of 38 Studios, but 38 Studios is still out there. And so we have to do this in a way that guarantees the public that we did it correctly. Again, the debate will be about the merits of the transaction and not about the process.
Do you agree with me that you got to pass a bill supporting this thing by the end of this calendar year, or you're in real competitive trouble with Worcester or anybody else?
I don't know if that's the absolute deadline, but I would say that it's close to the deadline.
Which means after you get this whole parade done, you're going to come back in for a special vote or ask for one?
I don't know the answer to that. It will depend on where we are at the end of the hearings. And whether it's December or January, for instance, while I do agree with you, there's a real sense of urgency about this, I don't think a few weeks one way or the other ought to make a big difference.
Well, a few weeks, I agree, December 15th versus January 10th. But October versus November versus December might be a whole different ballgame. We'll see how fast, is there a special session for the Massachusetts State House to come together and finance Worcester? Let me tell you, they're a lot more proactive with each other right now than the state is with Pawtucket. So we'll see. I appreciate your efforts on it. And thanks for your help to save the budget. It was quite the drama. Good to see you, man. Thank you.
Good to see you. Thank you.
Senator Bill Conley. Final word when we come back to you. Way too calm on this PawSox thing. I don't want to have to say I told you so. Just saying. Just saying. Secretary of State Nellie Gorbea on all sorts of registering you to vote and all sorts of spoon-feeding your democracy. Tomorrow, right here on State of Mind. See you on the radio at 3 on WPRL. Thanks for watching. Good night.